The winter wind howled through the dark alleys of the city, carrying with it a biting cold that seemed to sink straight into the bones. Snowflakes drifted down slowly under the dim yellow glow of the street lamps, covering the cracked pavement in a thin, fragile blanket of white. On nights like this, most people hurried home to warmth, family, and dinner. But for a boy named Ethan, there was no home to hurry to, only the hard concrete beneath an old bridge and a tattered blanket too thin to fight the cold. Ethan was only 12, yet life had already dealt him more heartache than many would face in a lifetime. His father had passed away in a construction accident 2 years ago, and his mother, struggling with illness, had been taken into a long-term care facility far from the city. With no relatives willing to take him in, Ethan had slipped through the cracks of the system. Now, the streets were his home. He survived on small acts of ingenuity, collecting cans, helping market vendors carry boxes, and sometimes, when luck allowed, receiving a warm sandwich from a kind stranger. That night, he sat on the edge of a quiet sidewalk, rubbing his hands together and blowing into them for warmth. The city buzzed in the distance, car horns, laughter from restaurants, the occasional sound of heels tapping across the pavement. But here, where the street narrowed and the light faded, it was just him. His stomach growled with a deep, aching emptiness. Just then, headlights swept across the street as a sleek black car slowed to a stop nearby. The vehicle was immaculate, almost glowing under the streetlight. From inside, a tall man stepped out, wearing an expensive overcoat and leather gloves. He was clearly someone important. His face was handsome yet serious, marked by the confidence of a man used to being in control. This was Victor Hale, one of the city's most successful billionaires, known for his towering glass skyscrapers and ruthless business deals. Tonight, however, his expression looked colder than the air around them. Victor glanced briefly at Ethan but said nothing as he locked his car and began walking toward a high-end restaurant across the street. Ethan didn't call out or beg, he had learned by now that most people kept their distance. Instead, he shifted his blanket tighter around his shoulders and returned to staring at the ground. But as Victor reached the curb, a gust of wind tore through the street, catching a small piece of paper from his coat pocket. It fluttered away like a fragile leaf, landing halfway down the sidewalk. It wasn't just any paper, it was a photo. Ethan didn't know that yet. All he saw was something important escape from the man's pocket. Without hesitation, Ethan sprang to his feet and dashed across the sidewalk. His bare hands hit the snow as he snatched the paper before it could blow into the busy road. He jogged toward Victor, holding it out with both hands. "Sir, you dropped this," Ethan said softly. Victor turned, a faint look of surprise in his eyes. He reached out, taking the paper. As his gaze fell upon it, his face changed. It was a worn photograph of a young girl, his daughter, Lily, smiling on a beach from years ago. That picture was one of the few things he carried with him everywhere. Without it, he would have felt lost. Victor's voice was low. "Thank you." He studied the boy, noting the thin blanket, the trembling hands, the threadbare shoes with holes. Something stirred in him, though he quickly masked it. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy replied. Victor nodded once, then turned to continue toward the restaurant. But for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he hesitated mid-step and glanced back. Ethan had already returned to his spot on the sidewalk, pulling the blanket tighter. The sight clung to Victor's mind as he entered the restaurant. Inside, Victor sat at a table surrounded by warmth, soft music, and the scent of rich food. He ordered steak and wine, yet found himself distracted. The boy's small act, returning the photo without asking for anything, echoed in his thoughts. In Victor's world, people were always trying to take, to get ahead, to gain leverage. But here was a boy who had nothing, offering something without expecting a reward. When his meal arrived, Victor could barely touch it. The image of Ethan shivering outside wouldn't leave him alone. Against every habit and instinct he'd built over years of business, he asked for the meal to be packed to go. Stepping outside again, Victor crossed the street toward Ethan. The boy looked up in surprise as the billionaire handed him the warm food and a bottle of water. "Here," Victor said simply. Ethan's eyes widened. "Thank you, sir." He unwrapped the container quickly, the steam rising into the cold night air. He ate with small, careful bites, savoring each mouthful as though it were the first real meal he'd had in days. Victor watched quietly, something shifting inside him. For the first time in years, he felt the faint spark of warmth that didn't come from wealth or success. Over the next week, Victor found himself driving through that street more often than before. Each time, Ethan was there, sometimes with a smile, sometimes weary, but always with a polite nod. One snowy evening, Victor stopped again. He brought Ethan a thick winter coat, gloves, and boots. "They're for you," Victor said. Ethan tried to refuse at first, saying others might need them more. But Victor insisted, and finally, the boy accepted. That night, for the first time in weeks, Ethan slept without his teeth chattering. The days turned into weeks, and what began as a single act of kindness from Ethan became a bridge between two vastly different worlds. Victor learned that Ethan spent much of his day at the public library, reading anything he could find, stories, science books, even old newspapers. His dream, he admitted shyly, was to become an architect like the ones who built the city's tall buildings. Victor listened, quietly impressed. No one had believed in him when he was young either, and yet here was this boy, still holding on to dreams despite having nothing. Something in Ethan reminded him of himself before the money, before the cold boardrooms and endless deals. One late afternoon, after weeks of small conversations, Victor made a decision. He called his driver and gave an address. When Ethan saw the black car pull up again, he smiled, expecting maybe another warm meal or blanket. But Victor stepped out and said, "Ethan, how would you like to come with me?" The boy hesitated, unsure. But there was a calm steadiness in Victor's eyes. He nodded. Victor drove him to a safe, warm apartment he owned but rarely used. It was modest compared to his penthouse, but to Ethan, it was a palace. A soft bed, running water, a kitchen, it was overwhelming. "This is yours for as long as you need," Victor told him. Ethan's voice wavered. "Why? Why are you helping me?" Victor smiled faintly. "Because one night, you gave something back to me that I didn't even know I could lose. And you did it when you had nothing to gain. That means more than you realize." Over the following months, Victor arranged for Ethan to attend school, bought him books, and introduced him to architects in his company. Slowly, the boy's life began to change. His grades soared. He started sketching buildings, drawing bridges, imagining cities filled with light and hope. Every time Victor saw him working, he felt something new, a pride that money could never buy. Years later, Ethan stood on the stage of a grand university hall, graduating with honors in architecture. In the front row, Victor sat with tears in his eyes, clapping louder than anyone. The boy who had once sat shivering on a sidewalk now stood tall, ready to design the future. When Ethan was offered a job at one of the country's top firms, he had only one request, that a portion of his earnings be dedicated to building affordable housing for children without homes. "Because someone once gave me a chance," he said. And Victor? He realized that the truest wealth he had ever gained came not from skyscrapers or business deals, but from the small act of kindness shown by a boy who had nothing to give but his heart. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness ripple into a lifetime of change. Ethan didn't know that returning a lost photo would change both his life and Victor's forever. We never know how far our kindness can go. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Pure Kindness Stories, and share it with someone who might need a little hope today.